Hello, everyone. Yeah, I've been given the task to give you a demo of our new system for handling multiple languages, among others. So I'll just start by sort of sharing the background for our sort of design choices and why this was a hard thing to make in the beginning. Lost in translation, I guess that's kind of a keyword because this is a thing that has been sort of in the back of our minds for, I'd say, almost 20 years now, trying to figure out how to deal with something that sounds simple, supporting multiple languages. So I'll just take you through some of the problems that we've been sort of trying to address. First, of course, you have some content, right? This is the vanilla. This is complex enough, but then you probably want to support multiple language versions of that content. You might want to have some different content in each region or country. Some countries even have multiple languages. So then you might want different structures and URLs across your various sites and whatnot. You might have different editors that are handling the different regions or languages. You might even want to say that for some of the languages, yeah, you limit who can even access it. And then there's scheduling. I mean, let's say you're publishing a product, it might have a different release schedule in one region than another. Then what about search? Getting performance, I mean, both front end and for the editors. And putting all this together in some kind of meaningful user interface. So these are some of the problems that we're facing, but there's also other thoughts we've had, like what if you want to reuse content or extend it, like in a product information management system? So you might have some base data for a product, then you might enrich it for specific markets, etc. So there's like tons of use cases that we feel are sort of aligned or intersecting in this area. So as you can see, it's much more complicated than just supporting a different flag for that content. And we wanted to sort of enable you to do all of these things without sort of making it hard. And that's been sort of the challenge. So we came up with a solution and prototype last year. And now we're planning to release the beta this just before Christmas. So I'll take you through it, and we call the solution layers. And this is because it's doing a lot more than just translation. So let's have a look at the concept. Basically, you now have projects. If you're using XP, I think 7.3 or newer, you have something called projects, which enables you to basically create silos of content. So you could have a project that's my homepage, another project for your blog, or like we do in Enonic, we have one project for the homepage, one for the developer site, and another one for the Enonic market. So it's basically isolating content, and that's nice. So you could create a project, that's the beginning, and as you can see from this label, it has a language, English. So then you can add layers. This is kind of the root layer, but then you can keep adding more layers that inherit from this top layer. So in this example, I'm just adding 3 new layers that all inherit from the root: French, Chinese, and German. And then you can keep adding layers to these ones. So this is just like a scenario. So you might have regions. So in this case, you have Switzerland in French and in German, and then maybe the German side. So why would you need a German sort of collection of data here? Well, maybe there is more data that is specific to Germany. And the same for the Swiss markets here. And then you reuse the work you already did to translate it, right? So this is just like the tip of the iceberg, but it kind of sort of illustrates the concept of layering. So you produce content, it sort of drips down to the different layers, and you can work independently in each layer. So let's have a look at this in practice. So here's Content Studio, hopefully familiar for most of you, and if not, just pay attention and give it a try later. It's all available through our developer portal. So I just set up a project here using the superhero application. So I have some data. Excellent. And here's the projects we mentioned. So I can toggle now between, in this case, the default project and this superhero blog project. And obviously, you have content. You can see that all this content is now new. Nothing has been published. Then I can go into this section, which may be familiar for some of you. If you haven't, this has been available for a while. And I can go either in the editing mode or in this settings mode. And if you have the sufficient permissions, you can work here and manage projects. So this has been there for a while. So I can go here, obviously, and click and add new projects. So you see we already have this superhero blog project. The new feature is basically building on top of this. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to select superhero blog, click new, and then it says, do you want to create a layer under superhero blog? Okay. And creating a layer looks almost similar to project, so I'll just give it a name. So I go for the Norwegian version here. And then you can set the default language for this layer. And then we can set access mode, which controls the sort of standard permissions. So public, everyone can read, this is fine. This also means that you can choose to sort of reduce access to content. So permissioning is handled on each level in the project, in the layering system. And then we have roles. And this is stuff that already exists for projects, but you get this for each layer. So you can individually control who can access and edit. So if I say all Enonic employees can be editors, then they have access to this layer as editors, meaning they can create, edit and publish everything by default. I'll just ditch this for now. Clicking save. So there we are, it was created. And we're here, we now see we got a new layer, nicely sort of indented as a child of the superhero blog. So then I can create another layer, new. This time we'll call it Superhjälten. And pay attention to this one. This is a very important thing. Once a layer is created, it will get an identifier and you cannot change it. It's basically going into the repository name, and for many reasons, you cannot change it. Then you would have to sort of set it up again and import and export your data. So we see that the parent project is Norwegian, and then we can set the language, Svenska. Copy the access mode from parent. Yes, this is nice. And then save. So there we are. We now have sort of 3 layers here, the root layer in English, Norwegian layer, and Swedish layer. And let's see what this looks like if I'm going over to the edit mode. I can now toggle, and you basically get the same. So if you're an editor without permissions to manage, you don't get access to the settings here. But if you And if you only have limited access, you won't be able to select all layers and projects here. So I can now toggle over to the Superhelp plugin. And we can see that in this case, we get the same content, but there's a few changes. It is apparently sort of gray, and it has this small cloud here. The blue cloud is an icon that represents the fact that this is inherited from a parent layer. And the reason why it's gray is because it has not been sort of modified in any way. And you can also see that it says EN in parentheses here. Okay, so at least now I'm in the Swedish layer, and you can see basically you're seeing the same stuff. And let's go back to the root layer. So now I have this English content, and here you can see there's no cloud, there's no EN here, which is basically meaning this is, let's say, the original item, and it's in the same language as the layer itself. So if I want to, let's say, publish this now, I can just go in here, click publish 3, and publish the entire sort of site in this case. So there we are. Now everything is published. If we now switch to the Norwegian layer, you can see nothing is published here. So it means that each layer is operating individually. You can sort of individually control when things happen. But still, what if I add another item in this root layer? So I'm going to posts here and create new post. And this add test in English layer. Testing. Okay, I'll mark it as ready. So we see we now got the new content in the English layer, toggling down to the Norwegian layer. We can see we also got that item here. But I'd like to actually change this item. So when I select it, there's something different there. You don't have the edit button basically. But you have something called Localise. So if I click Localise, it's basically the same as edit, but it's now copying the language, as it says, from the local layer. So it's basically setting language to Norwegian, and I could start translating it. As you can see, you can also localize the URL and of course the content. Save. Closing this one, we see that this is currently in progress. Let's switch down to the Swedish layer. The Swedish layer still now has this original item from the English layer. So if I toggle back to Norwegian and mark it as ready, it should actually appear in the Swedish layer. Here, now you see you suddenly got the Norwegian localized version. So this is how it works. It basically drips down. When things have been created initially and inherited and been marked as ready at some point, it will sort of stay until a new mark as ready version comes in. What about creating something in the Norwegian layer? So I want to extend the Norwegian layer. Okay. And this time I will not mark as ready. I will just leave it yellow. So now I create something in the Norwegian layer. This shouldn't then be in the English layer, obviously, because it's a parent. But in the Swedish layer, it should appear. And this time it actually appears because the first time you create it, it will instantly be synced down so you can see that item, because of in many cases there might be child items and you might make child items ready before the parent, and we need to make everything consistent. But basically you now see how these things are working, and how you can inherit, you can customize and extend, you can even move stuff in each layer without sort of breaking the inheritance chain. So approving this one now. Mark is ready. I could decide to publish, right? And again, this works just like any normal sort of working in a regular project in XP. So for the editor, the essential difference is that you get this information about it being inherited. You also see one other difference. When things have been localized, sort of the opacity goes away, so it gets sort of dark, indicating that this has been sort of locally modified. And in this case, you see it's actually from a parent layer, but locally modified. And this one is obviously original in this layer. So we also have a new extension, which is called Content Studio Plus. And if you're a subscription user, you get access to Content Studio Plus, which is essentially this widget, the layering widget. So if I choose the layering widget and click maybe this one, we can see this was inherited from the English layer. It's here in the Norwegian, but there's actually even descendants, and I could show all. And here you can see all the variants. You can see the status, etc. For each item. You can see it's not published in any of the layers. And obviously, if I toggle now to the Swedish layer, we can see how this looks like. So here you can see it's not localized. You can click localize here. You can see the sort of chain of inheritance. Also looking at something else, you see created here, and it's not being modified in the Norwegian layer, but directly inheriting to the Swedish layer. So that's the basic functionality. And then you might ask yourself, what do I need to do in order to use this for my current application? And the answer is nothing. It's actually working out of the box, because your application doesn't really see if it's a layer or not, and doesn't have to care about that. So the only time where you might want to do something is if you, for instance, want to have links to the different layers, or to, let's say you have an international site and you want to be able to link between the layers, you'd have to add something for that, obviously. That would typically be just configuration with the URLs to your different sites. And then if you want to link from, let's say, this page, which says only Norwegian layer, right? And you want to be able to link directly to that in other layers, you can use the create URL functions and just set the context to each different layer. So it's actually possible to do this cross-site linking, basically. And in the end, you just need to set up normal virtual hosts and everything. So let's see what's behind the scenes to make this work. So I'll dive into Data Toolbox and go into Data 3. And what we see here is the CMS repos here. The default repo, then this is the English one, Enonic CMS sample blog. Then there's this Enonic CMS Superhelt plugin, Enonic CMS Superhjelten. And as you can see, this is literally just separate repositories, and we have implemented logic that will sync the data between the different repositories. And each repository is working just like it used to. The only difference to sort of talk about is that we're adding some new properties. So if I dive into this one, And here, for instance, it's the featured image. We can look at the JSON. We can see that there's a new section here for inheritance. It basically tells us what to inherit for this item or not. So in this case, you see it's inheriting the name, it's inheriting the data, it's inheriting the sorting mode and the parent item. And also there's some other metadata telling us where we inherited this item from originally. So if you're sort of migrating your existing content, you might want to manipulate those data, but in general, if you have the root data, you can just start creating your new layers and go live, basically. So minimal effort required, basically, to get this going. And I thought I'd end the demo by showing you a live implementation. One of our customers has been piloting this functionality. So let's see, ColliCare.com. So in this case, they built a website with, tons of different location globally. So we can see here, for instance, Norway, Finland. Let's have a look at China, for instance. This is pretty interesting. We have, let's see what we get. Finland, India, and each of the countries have their site in both, let's say, local language and in English. So you can see the India site is both available in English and Hindi. This is pretty interesting. And they also have this corporate website, which is actually slightly different from the others. Here you can see the menu is different. Let's have a look at Norway then. Here you can see there's a different menu. And they're basically reusing content from even all the way from their digital asset management system and down to corporate sites, employees that are globally employed and local employees, etc. So they're able to sort of utilize most of the features from the layering system. I can log in to show you the back office. Going into Content Studio, here we can see their structure. So they basically have one project called ColliCare Common. So we can have a look at that. So we see they have something called ColliCare Logistics here. There's some very basic information. There's some employees here. There's some press releases and about us page. That's it. And then there's all their images from their DAM. This is synced in dynamically from external PhotoWare installation. So that's another app we're coming with soon. It's the PhotoWare integration. If I go down one step, you can see here there's the corporate website in English and Norwegian. Then there's the country's root layer. And in the country's root layer, we can see how they've sort of localized everything. But pay attention, this is sort of a prototype, so they don't have this nice cloud icons here. But all of this content, almost all of it is locally created, and just a few things were inherited, the ones from, let's say, the employees that were inherited from the global layer, right? And then you can drill down. Let's have a look at the Chinese English layer. So here again, they're inheriting everything from the root. They may be adding some things that are specific to China, right? But due to the missing icon, we can't as easily see it here. And then you have the Chinese versions. So that's it. Short summary. Use this to create content and enrich it through different layers, possibly translate it. Reusing, if you have a structure with central content production going across different local items, you can also use this approach. And there is essentially nothing you have to do to make use of it with your current application. It's plug and play. There was one question from or multiple questions from Thomas Torjussen, basically about what the front end will look like. How do you switch between the different languages, etc. So short version is just like always in Enonic. There is no sort of decision on our side how things will look. It's all up to you how you want to implement it and how you want it to work. So you could see that from ColliCare. It's basically their own design and their own decisions on that. And also, yeah, can you deploy different layers to different top level domains, basically? Yes. So you can choose any kind of structure in terms of what this looks like when you deploy it. So you could have, for instance, ColliCare.China, as you saw, ColliCare.Norway.no. But you could also say, I want ColliCare.com/NO, ColliCare.com/CN. So this is fully flexible in terms of what the deployment is. Also, Jonas was asking about how can an editor differentiate between content in the parent layer and content the editor doesn't have permission to edit. Both are dimmed. So you always work in one specific layer, obviously. And if you have permissions in that layer, you can edit anything. So you can even edit stuff that was inherited. So you differentiate that by seeing the cloud icon. If there's a cloud icon, you know it's inherited. If it's dimmed, you know it's never been edited before in this layer. And these are basically just hints to tell you about, okay, you're actually localizing stuff, you're inheriting this. Otherwise, it's just content like everything else. So permissions are on top of this. So you could set up permissions like you've done before. You could say, oh, Gummi here can only edit blog posts, right? But Allan, even if he looks like Santa's helper, he can edit the entire site. So I guess short version is the icons and the shading is just hints for telling you about the inheritance. Otherwise, it works just like other content. It's only this localized the first time you localize it.